Hello and welcome to the API Assisted Attacks. My name is Menachem and I'm so excited to be here today. Thank you very much for joining me. We have fully packed agenda, so let's jump straight into that. Today we are going to talk about three different topics, which I personally find really interesting. The first one is we will take a look at the evolution of API, generative AI, and cybersecurity. What happened over the last 20 years and why everyone is talking about today. We will take a look how generative AI and API security helping and speeding up attacks. We'll see how threat actors are using that, and I will show you real life example that I personally did, which I think really interesting that you can also try later after the session. And then we will finish by talking about how Akamai is leveraging generative AI capabilities as part of our API security product and how that can make your life much easier and discover threats and attacks early in the process. Let's start. So let's start by briefly talking about what happened over the last 20 years in the evolution of AI and machine learning in the cybersecurity world. When we think about detection and cybersecurity world 20 plus years ago, most of the products were based on signature based. Things that you will block. Things that you don't know, the product will not block. Allow and deny lists or similar concepts. Of course, the industry evolved over time. And then early 2000, 2010, the rise of the behavior analysis, behavior analytics products, find deviations in the traffic, find abnormalities, and find attacks or attackers or devices or bots that trying to behave like a person, try to behave like a human, and try also to attack companies. Of course, many products were introduced during the time, and we know that it's never ending. And then additional advanced threat detections being introduced. And that's thanks to the evolution of big data and machine learning. When a lot of big data companies and technologies were emerged at the same time, machine learning and AI companies also developed a lot of new techniques and compatibilities. When you merge the big data and machine learning, that gave a huge breakthrough in the industry and in the detection world, which helped and still helping even today to discover really advanced attacks and activities. But after that, of course, we started to see more advanced compatibilities. And over the last couple of years, we started to see generative AI tools, products that automatically try to understand the network, the traffic, the user, the attackers, the meaning behind that, and of course, recently even taken action automatically using some agents. But today we are not going to talk about that. We are going to talk about why happening and why API security is so important and why everyone is talking about it today. There are a couple of reasons why this is actually happening. First of all, a lot of attackers change their target, change their mindset to go after APIs. And that started between 5 to 10 years ago because a lot of companies implemented a lot of other solutions in place, a WAF, firewall, and many other products. And digital transformation also happened. Companies started to be open more to the cloud, share data, connect to other system and environments. And that's, of course, happened as part of, or also in addition of other activities. And APIs were a backbone of most of that. So attackers said, where else can we get the data from? And of course, the answer was APIs. So they started to go after APIs. The second reason why API security is a hot topic now is API is playing a critical role in the digital transformation. Ask any company before and after COVID, for example, or what happened over the last 3 to 5 years. And you will hear from the biggest banks, biggest healthcare companies that APIs became more important for them. They are implementing more API, they're consuming more APIs. It's critical for them to provide cutting edge innovation and service for their customers. While that's actually happening and companies digitize and opening more API, the regulation, of course, also saw that and started to introduce additional and new regulations that require companies to have API security in place. Take as an example PCI DSS 4.2, 4.0 and 4.2 that require API security, discovery, and visibility as an example, and many other regulations. And of course, if you think about every generative AI tools today, they have APIs. There's no question about that. Of course, people talk about MCPs, people talk about end-to-end, A2A. There are many different protocols and ability to connect to different products. But of course, APIs are here and they will still be here. One interesting report that Gartner released that talks about the API consumption. They said that because of the revolution and the innovation in generative AI, 30% of the growth in APIs in the world will come from generative AI products. So of course, that's something that we see definitely already happening. Good. So we talked about what happened over the last 10 to 20 years in the world of APIs and threat actors. But there is one fundamental question that I ask myself actually, and I'm sure that some of you also asking that question. How threat actors are speeding up their attacks using generative AI and machine learning. So let's take a look into that. Of course, generative AI is a great tool and is mostly used today by, of course, when threat actors using that to automate and speed up their attack. And it's also lowering the barrier to attack. We still have not seen a lot of use cases where it's fully automated, where generative AI just go and attack everything in 0 days. It's still very early. Of course, things evolve fast and maybe we will see more of that happening, but we didn't see a lot of cases like that so far. Mostly what we see that threat actors are using generative AI tools to automate, scale, and lower the barrier for them to attack different technologies and environments. And I wanted to focus on two aspects as part of the kill chain methodology. And the first one is reconnaissance, and the second one is reducing time of attack. So how attackers can use the generative AI tools to actually do it. The first one, they can do reconnaissance. Leveraging those automations and generative AI tools, they can discover information about the company footprint pretty easy. It can reduce the time for them to learn, understand, and also discover exposed API keys and secrets that the companies might sharing outside to the world. And it also reduces the time for them to actually attack the company. For example, they can automatically download the Swagger file, the Open API spec. They can automatically analyze that, understand, and also get some recommendations and guidance what they should do with what they find. So how reconnaissance reducing the time using generative AI tools. So we can take a look at that from like 3 steps angle. The first one is historically, you need to do a lot of research before you conduct your activities. Today, the attackers can just go to different tools, automate that, ask simple questions, and get a lot of details and information about things that have been shared by the companies. Then they can craft some code, they can craft some commands, and they can also do some automation. And then they can execute it much faster. They can try multiple things multiple times. It can be adaptable. At the end of the day, it's reduce the barrier and it's increase the velocity for the attackers when they do it. So let me show you a real life example that I did using ChatGPT 4.0. Of course, you can use Grok, you can use a lot of other tools to do it. And to do that, what I did, I built a lab and I took an environment and deployed a Crappy, which is an open source runnable environment that you can download if you would like to your own lab. You can experiment with that. You can learn how API-related attacks are happening. But what I did here, I deployed a Crappy environment, and I download the open spec, the open API, the Swagger file from that lab. And I upload that to the ChatGPT 4.0, and I ask that, hey, I am a white hat trying to exploit an application. One of the application API is as the following, and then I started to communicate and ask simple questions. And you can see here, I didn't try to be smart. I didn't try to give really detailed prompts, really smart prompt with a lot of variations, trying to maybe, don't say that I'm white hat attacker, just trying to say maybe I'm a researcher, etc., etc. I try to be really blunt here, short, and see if that's working, and if I need to do any, changes in my way of doing that variation of questions. And actually, surprisingly, I got that answer pretty fast without any resistance from the system. So let's see what I actually got here. So I upload that file, and I started to ask some simple questions. Hey, can you help me to actually attack that environment? So I started to get some ideas from the system, like try to do authentication authorization testing, try maybe to do token manipulation, or try to do input validation. But then I said, okay, I already tried that. It was not helpful for me. Can you maybe focus more on the OWASP API top 10? For some of you who are not familiar with the OWASP API, it's a great framework that's highly recommended to every company. Take a look at and make sure that you are protected against attacks that mentioned in the OWASP API top 10. So I asked for more advanced techniques. And of course, great, the system was really helpful. I started to map my Swagger to the OWASP API top 10. For example, the first one is a list is BOLA, broken object level authorization, where one user trying to access another user data or one system access to another system data or information. So I tried to see if I can get more help or additional help from the system. So first one, of course, I got the OWASP API number 1. And then he started to give me other activities like misassignment, security misconfiguration, injection. I didn't even ask for OWASP API top 10, the latest version 2023. I just asked something really simple, and I started to get answers. And then I said, okay, let's actually go to the basics. I said, okay, what if I'm doing just fuzzing for those APIs? Can you try to do that? And of course, the system will not go and do the fuzzing for me, because it's been built to not do any harmful activities, but it's giving me some ideas. What could happen if I started to do some other techniques and activities? Now, again, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with 1=1, which is one of the simplest and oldest techniques out there that, of course, already been blocked and discovered by a lot of systems today. But I said, what if I will do that? So you start to give me more ideas and activities, and try to do SQL injection. So it started to be more advanced over time, type correction, overflow testing, and then it started to give me the actual data. So not surprisingly, right, the system helped me, guide me, and take me through the steps and the activities. And that's why I said previously, like a couple of minutes ago, that it's reduced the time and the barrier. Think about a threat actor that don't have a lot of experience in API security or approaching some API technologies, right? And they are trying to find their way inside different environments while they're doing lateral movement or reconnaissance, and they discover some technologies and activities. So instead of them need to sit down and learn those technologies for a couple of hours, they can go and they can just use different generative AI tools and get their help from them to make it much faster. Of course, we have more examples how that can be more deep dive and in-depth. As an example here, I ask, give me more advanced misassignment attacks, and then I started to get additional activities and payload. I took that code, put it in my lab, and then just running that to see what the results. Not surprisingly, it's actually worked in some cases because it's a vulnerable lab with some vulnerabilities, so it's really helpful. But then I paused and I said, okay, but why should I do everything manually, right? If I'm like a threat actor that I would like to scale, like want to do more, can somehow I can automate that and ask other tools. Now, of course, those legitimate tools, Copilot, ChatGPT, and Grok, and other tools were not built to do that. But they said maybe there are other systems and tools that can actually do it. And not surprisingly, we found that there is like entire world of what known as a dark LLM, or what known as black hat GPTs, or malicious AIs. Those tools will do some activities and things that the other tools will not agree to do. As an example, there is a tool called Worm GPT or Fraud GPT. It can craft a lot of phishing emails, social engineering scripts at scale, and it can help you to scale and do it much faster. So let's see how it looks like. Here is an example from the dark web where someone publishing exclusive bot that designed for fraudsters, hackers, spammers, and like-minded individuals. And then, of course, what you can do, they list everything here. It says like it can write malicious code. It can create phishing pages. And at the bottom, it even says 3,000 plus confirmed sales. So a lot of people are actually using that. Another example, it's a bot that you get through Telegram that someone is publishing that they have 2 new bots that basically called Dark Bart, which is a version of Google Bart AI. And then, of course, it's superior to all the category because it's trained on the dark web. So it's actually much smarter. Another example that someone showing how those tools are actually working, it's we basically ask, hey, write me a working code for Bank of America scam page. And then it will give you a page. Or at the bottom, it says, name 5 banks I can easily get approved for credit line. So it's dark LLM, and it's crazy and amazing world that if you have time, go read more. But the reason I brought that today's presentation, if you think about that, if you connect the legitimate tools, right, to the dark LLMs, maybe through API or different techniques, and you automate those things, what could happen? And attackers are already doing that. It's not if they are doing that, and they automate and they use a lot of tools today to scale and make a lot of activities. Okay, until now, we talked about the second part of the presentation, where we explored how generative AI tools can help you to learn more about API security, experiment in a lab, and how some threat actors using dark LLMs. But now, let's take a look how Akamai using machine learning and generative AI tools is part of our API security product that help to make your life much easier. So when you think about a person who sits as a security practitioner or security engineer, and every day they wake up in the morning, have their own coffee, and then opening, of course, the security products they have, and taking a look at the data. They're taking a look at the result and the information from their security products. But when we talked to a lot of them, all of them mentioned that they have a couple of challenges that they need to face on a daily basis. And the first one is data. They have a lot of data, false positive. It's really hard to do prioritizations and take action. So you got alerts, you got findings. It's really hard to take action. And with the Akamai generative AI tools, we can definitely help them to solve all of those 4 challenges. So let's take a look at each of them, understand more in depth what are the challenges, and then we will go more in depth how Akamai leveraging generative AI tools and machine learning techniques to actually make the life much easier for people. So let's start with the data. So I'm sure there's a lot of you, when you saw a security product, any security product at the beginning, you were like, oh, it's an amazing product. I must collect all the data to get the best results. But then when we look from an API world, when you try to collect all of your data, there is simple questions a lot of companies struggling today, which is there a way to map the traffic that I'm collecting, that I will know which is API and which is not an API, which is basically a clustering challenge, or from where my data is coming from and what is the context of the data, right? I don't know if that's an API that's relevant for me, who using that API, what system, what tools, what permission. So it's a context. It's really, really important. The second challenge is a false positive. So you collect all the data, you deploy the product, but then you get a lot of alerts, a lot of false positive. And you ask yourself, like, why this alert been triggered? Either is enough evidence for me to actually go and investigate that. So it's a big challenge that companies are facing today. The third one is prioritizations. So you got a lot of alerts, right? But then which alert should get higher attention? Or do I have enough context from the business to do the right prioritization? So you might think that everyone knows the prioritizations, right? A lot of people will go to the red alerts first. But the reality is actually different. It's not always that the red alert is the most critical. Sometimes really advanced attacks start in the low, in the info, for example. And sometimes also the business has different prioritizations, that they want to prioritize alerts and activities differently. And also sometimes you have different source of alerts and information that require you to prioritize the findings differently. And the last one is taking action. So you finally clear, analyze, minimize, deduplicate, did everything that you need to get the best dashboard ever. But then how fast can you actually take an action? So you got an alert. How fast can you actually, take an action and make sure that it's not actually happening again? Some companies have different methodology, different rules. Some companies talks about 1, 5, 10. Some companies talk about 5, 10, 20. It's like 1 minute for detection, 5 minutes for containment, and 10 minutes for remediation. It's like every company and industry in the world have their own process for that. But of course, a lot of people ask themselves, how fast can I take an action? Or what should I do with the alert? So I got an alert, but what actually should I do with that? Or how do I actually prevent it from happening again? So 4 different great topics, but let's now see how we actually solving each of them. I know that I'm actually running pretty fast. So if you would like, you can pause and you can repeat what we just talked about. Let's go back to talking a little bit faster. Okay, so let's first talk about the multiple AI models that we are using in our product. Of course, we have many more, a lot of more, but here I wanted to select a couple to show you a couple of examples how each of them are working together and how at the end of the day, when you open the product itself and you get like one alert, what is actually happening behind the scenes. So we talked about a couple of challenges that security practitioners are facing every day, right? But also they are facing right discovery. So where do I have my APIs? Can I detect some APIs? How do I reduce a false positive? How do I prioritize and take an action? And for every and each challenge, we have different machine learning and AI-based tools that can help them to actually make their life much easier. And let's start with the first one, which is the data. So what is specifically the challenge here? A lot of companies asking, where is my data? What it contains? What permission does it have inside the data? And the solution that we are offering is something called CallFlow that we develop internally, that it's basically understand the sequencing of the data and do it in scale and automated. So let's say that you give us a lot of data. You don't know which one is an API. You don't know which one the parameters is an email or credit card number or PII or other information. But you want the product to cluster, to connect all the dots together, understand which one is actually an API, and represent only one line. And that's exactly what our product is doing. It's understanding automatically any scale that this is what you have, and that's how it looks like. So you get like one alert that it's meaningful or one line when you look at the data from a discovery perspective. Also, from a data perspective, you want to understand the API relationship and flows. because APIs, right, it's coming from different directions and it goes through different systems. Now, if you see API only from one angle, it's not really helpful. You want to see the whole story. You want to see the chain of activities. And that's exactly what the call flow is doing. It's automatically cluster and understand the relationship between the APIs and give you full picture and activities to what is happening in different stage and activities. So it's really, really cool because finally you have a system that show you everything and all the relationship you can zoom in and zoom out to understand what is happening. Let's talk about false positive. So you get a lot of alerts, a lot of data, how the system can automatically distinguish between what is legitimate requests versus what is malicious requests. And to solve that, we developed something called WAF-PAF, which is a set of algorithms that basically identify real attacks versus legitimate requests. And I wanted to do a small experiment with you. So take a look at the right side and on the left side, or the left side and the right side. And try to think which one is legitimate request and which one is malicious request. And we just look in one small simple request. And the same challenge machines they have today. And the machines need to distinguish between what is legitimate versus what is not legitimate. Historically, a lot of old-based WAF products were generating a lot of false positive because it was really challenging for them to actually identify that. Of course, more advanced products solved it already. But what do you think is malicious versus not malicious, or malicious versus not malicious? So let me help you. So here we can see a real attack, and here we can see actually a legitimate attack. And what we saw that before we implemented the WAF-PAF algorithm, we had 76% precision when we show alerts, when we told the customers what we actually discovering. But after we did it across all customers, the algorithm helped them to actually would be so great that almost all the activities and all the alerts that we are generating was actually accurate, that helped them to focus on what is important and also automate the prevention. Okay, let's talk about prioritizations. So how do I prioritize my activities, my alerts, my information? So I'm getting a lot of alerts. Which one should I prioritize and investigate and respond first? So what we did, we combined two different confidence algorithms, so confidence and score, and it helped customers to prioritize the alerts. And when they look at the data, when they look at the alerts, they see a lot of information, of course, that's important for them to take an action. But here, what we see from like the attacker dashboard perspective, that the customers, they have confidence and they have score. And it's helped them to actually understand which one they should take an action on and which one is important for them to take a look at. Okay, the next one is taking action. So I got an alert, and which one should I take an action first and which one I don't need to do it? So we deployed a couple of generative AI or LM models that can understand the context and give you a response and also help you to automate some of that. So here you got the details of the purpose of the API, and that's fully automated. So we look at the data, we look at the alert and the information, and it can tell you what is the purpose of the data and the alerts. Now here, for example, it says what is the purpose, that we are analyzing API schema that help you understand what is actually happening. So as a summary, Akamai is leveraging a multiple different models, and each of them is built on top of each other. And the data go through all of them, from discovering the API to understand where you have APIs, to actually detect some threats, reduce a false positive because you don't want to get thousands of alerts and you don't know what to do with them. Once you get the data and the alerts, you want to prioritize that, and then you can see the right one. And of course, you would like taking action on that because you want to make sure that it's not happening again, or you want to make sure that actually what you found is taken care of. So, as a summary, over the last 30 minutes, we talked about, first of all, how generative AI tools lowering the barrier of entry and increasing the threat actor capacity and scale their attempts. And it was amazing to see how taking a simple lab with a crappy OpenAPI spec, uploading that to a generative AI tool, and getting easy to understand results. Then we saw how generative AI is actually important to detect and prevent attacks. And we finished by looking how Akamai API security leveraging multi-layer techniques all together to make sure that you get meaningful alerts and you can enable automated response. Before we are finishing, I wanted to ask yourself a truthful questions. First of all, how well do you know your APIs and their behavior? Or how many APIs you have? Who is using that? And if you think that you know the answers, can you actually spot malicious behavior in your API and automatically prevent that? What about your developers, a part of their CI/CD process? Do you perform any tests? Do you validate that the code they are putting is good? And can you detect and prevent against the OWASP API top 10 vulnerabilities? Because that's a basic. And if you didn't have the answer, or you answer actually no to one of the questions here, I highly recommend you to check our landing page in akamai.com API security, where you can learn more about the Akamai API security product. You can discover all of your APIs, domains, and related issues in a second. You can automatically stop API attacks in real time, and it's fully integrated in your entire CI/CD pipeline lifecycle, where you can help your developers to develop secured code by discovering their API, testing vulnerabilities, monitoring your entire environment for runtime attacks, and also scan your environment from the outside to see if you have any exposure. And with that, thank you very much for joining me today.